This is Thunderchild. Or at least it was Thunderchild. Our old wooden boat. We've spent the past 6 months restoring the interior on this boat. And there were a lot of reasons why we did this. No cupboards, poor lighting, a lack of storage. And did I mention that it was very, very dark inside? But she's come a long way since this. And don't get me wrong, this wasn't bad. We just knew it could be a lot better. And if this was going to be the boat that would take us around the world, we knew we would have a lot of work to do. What you're seeing here was about 9 months ago, and we still have so much more work to do. But we're getting there. The work we were able to do over the winter was made possible by this man, Joel. He took his boat off the docks and he went down to Mexico to start working on his new house. This meant that he had an empty house in Gabriola and an empty slip at the docks. He rented them out to us while he was away. This meant that we could start packing up all of our possessions and move out of the boat just before the harshness of winter kicked in. Living aboard in winter. An unsavory prospect. We did it last year, and it wasn't easy, but that's because the boat wasn't set up for it. Going through last year's winter was a formative experience. I both loved and hated it. I wouldn't take it back. Never. I think it's one of the most important experiences I've ever gone through in my life. Living off-grid, on a sailboat, in winter, on a remote island, where the power frequently goes out and the water freezes. You learn a lot about yourself and your partner, and you grow stronger as a result. So we went and picked up some tropical hardwoods so we could start working on the interior of the boat. You'll see this stuff later in the galley. We took a lot of this rough-cut timber that I had in the shop. We passed it through the table saw and then through the thickness planer. And that's what we framed everything in the boat with. The most problematic part of the boat was the galley. We used it every day, and it just wasn't set up right. So the first thing to do was to tear it down completely and see what was going on behind it. And turns out the ceiling planks were no longer attached. After I cleaned them up, I put them back and I fastened them. But we were short about 5 or 6 ceiling planks, so I produced a bunch more and got those on as well. With that out of the way, I started framing up everything that would eventually become the galley shelving and the supports for the dishwasher and the sink and mounting points for all of the plumbing that was going to go in. And this marks the beginning of the sanding, a job we knew we had to do while we were living on land. We didn't want to be creating this much dust in our home. 3 months of constant sanding. That was every deck beam, every surface we could find that we were going to varnish or paint, and the entire roof. This took a lot out of me. In fact, I tore a rotator cuff doing this. But as you'll see later, the results were absolutely worth it. This also marked me, at least, being able to do YouTube full time. I was able to work on the boat non-stop the entire time, so long as I filmed it and shared it with everyone. Now with all of the walls and framing and a general vision coming together, I could start putting the plumbing together, but to do that, I had to make sure everything was placed as it would be placed in the future. But before the plumbing goes in, we gotta prime and paint everything. And this was our first glimpse at the massive change that was headed our way. Soon, the bulkheads, one by one, started following suit and getting primed. Before we knew it, the inside of the boat felt completely different, and we knew that we were making the right choices. But just because we were starting to prime the bulkheads doesn't mean we were done with the roof. For some of the beams, we used a heat gun, and it worked really good in tight spots where a sander couldn't fit, and it helped remove a pretty decent bulk of what was on there. This paved the way for eventually sanding to a nice, fine 300 grit before we started the varnishing process. And remember, Haley still works full-time as a tattoo artist, so she would take her evenings after work or her days off, and she'd come down to the boat and work her butt off, making sure that everything was done to the highest standard. Meanwhile, the boat was really, really starting to look decrepit. This is about as bad as she ever looked. But now we're on to the cleanup process. This was a real turning point for us because we really got to see the boat come together and see the hard work that we put in turn into something more than disastrous mess. Something Haley often says is that when she finishes a big project, she considers it a love letter to me. This boat is absolutely littered with love letters from Haley. This is just as the days started getting longer again, and the smiles started returning to our faces. It started getting fun again. The birds started returning. Our friends started showing up. Silva Bay, Thunderchild, Haley, and myself all started coming back to life. But that's a bit of a double-edged sword, as it also means our time living on land was coming to a close, and we were still nowhere near ready to move back into the boat. But nevertheless, we persisted, and spirits were high. With the satisfaction of having 5 coats of varnish on all of the deck beams after so much hard work, it was time to put tape on the beams and start priming and painting everything. This was the true tipping point. With the majority of the dirty work completed, it was time to start assembling things so that we can get ready to move into the boat within a very short period of time. The stove needed to be mounted, and eventually we needed to run propane to it as well. Quite the satisfying upgrade compared to the camp stove that we had in here when we first bought the boat. Not to mention the addition of a fridge, obviously stocked up with beer. Exhaustion setting in from the sprint to the finish line, we kept our heads down and kept grinding away on every project we could wrap up. With the clock ticking and 3 days until we move aboard, Haley made sure to take the time to prepare the V-berth with paint and varnish, and man was it ever worth it. And remember the propane I mentioned? Yeah. Now we can cook aboard too. Things were really shaping up to look like we'd be able to live a comfortable and happy life aboard the boat. We were both getting very excited at this point. While Haley wrapped up the V-berth, I wrapped up the galley. Though it might not be complete, we can at least put stuff on some shelves, and that's a pretty big victory. Now with 24 hours before we move back aboard the boat, Haley made sure to take the time to paint the floors, and it was probably one of the best decisions we made. It looks absolutely stunning. This is the evening before we moved aboard, and we finally have running water, a beautiful sink, a functional stove, and crazy idea, a dishwasher on a boat. By this time, we'd been living aboard for a few days already. And if we have any hope of going sailing anywhere this summer, we need to get the boat finished inside. So the number one priority is getting fiddles on everything. And a fiddle is just a piece of wood or an object that blocks things from falling off of shelves while you're sailing. And unfortunately, my bandsaw blade snapped, so I had to make all the fiddles with a skill saw, a chisel, and a router. And this is that piece of Jatoba that you guys saw me purchase earlier in the episode. Putting this episode together is crazy, because we started off with a completed galley that was serviceable. And then, for months, we had a huge looming project that looked like it could never reassemble into anything. And here it is. Not only is it something, but I like to think it's something quite beautiful. I do think it's worth mentioning that even though a few things look fairly complete in the boat, we still have a long way to go inside here. We're going to replace all of the ceiling planks, make new cushions, finish all the fiddles throughout the rest of the boat, and so much more. But we are nearing the end of this, and that feels really good. So in much the same way Haley does, I'd like to consider the galley a love letter to Haley. We're now at the point where we get to spend some time adding beautiful little details to everything. My favorite part is the lettering I added to the bronze fiddle. With the galley almost completely finished now, I can start focusing on other cool details, such as these latches, which keep the midship hatch closed when we're underway. And more details that we've started adding since we've released any episodes. These little hooks to hang our pots and pans, as well as the addition of many, many lights throughout the entire boat. It makes night times aboard the boat almost as bright as during the day. Everywhere we look, there's more and more cool little details that Haley and I have labored over exactly where they go, such as this little light that Aladino gave us that hangs out over top of our mirror. New cushions for the V-berth, which is going to be the new color scheme of the whole boat eventually. Or this beautiful bronze clothing rack. Or a light for the V-berth. Everywhere I look, the boat is satisfying me more and more. I can't wait to see it in a few years from now, when we've had our hands on it for a lot longer. Even simple things like running the wires nice and neat and tidy makes a big difference to the quality of life while living aboard. I hope everyone's enjoyed this little look back at everything we did over the winter. I know I have. It makes me appreciate what I get to live in all that much more. Here's the ultimate before and after comparison that we've all wanted to see. What an absolutely staggering difference. I love how much more bright and colorful it is inside. Everything is just so much more intentional and thoughtful now. And a special thank you to everyone who's come to help out, like Flossie, or Dave who gave us the gimbaled stove, and Total Boat for supplying all of the paint and varnish we used on this project. And a special thank you to all of our patrons. We couldn't keep doing this without you guys. Cheers. Oh, good morning. I am just down below looking through some documents. I'm gonna go meet up with the owners pretty soon for some breakfast. This boat is, as I said, incredibly Spartan. There's no electrical systems whatsoever. Like there's no cooling plate, there's no lights, there's no water pumps, there's no... Yeah, there's nothing. It's wild. So that's an interesting thing to like. I mean, I did this with Dagon also, is go through and design the entire system. That just means it's a clean slate, fresh start.